There is a cooling system that has been tested by MIT, documented by the United Nations, and awarded by Rolex. It requires no electricity, no refrigerant gas, no maintenance. It is 2 clay pots, wet sand, and evaporation, a principle of physics that ancient Egyptians understood 4,500 years ago. In field trials, it extended the shelf life of eggplant from 3 days to 27. It costs $10. 620 million tons of food rot every year because developing nations lack refrigeration. This device already exists. It has always existed, and almost nobody in the modern world knows its name. It is called the Zearpot. This is its story. Before I explain how this device works, you need to understand the crisis it solves, because the scale of this problem is genuinely staggering. Every year, humanity produces enough food to feed 10 billion people. There are 8 billion of us, and yet, according to the United Nations, 1.3 billion tons of food is lost or wasted annually. That is 1/3 of all food produced for human consumption. Gone, and a massive portion of that waste happens before the food ever reaches a consumer. It rots in fields. It rots in markets. It rots in storage sheds with no temperature control. In sub-Saharan Africa, post-harvest losses for fruits and vegetables reach 30 to 50%. In parts of Southeast Asia, the figure is 15 to 50%. Not because of bad farming, not because of poor quality, simply because there is no cold storage. A peer-reviewed study published in Environmental Research Letters estimated that poor cold chain infrastructure is responsible for up to 620 million metric tons of food loss globally every single year. That food loss generates an estimated 1.8 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, roughly 28% of total annual United States greenhouse gas output. And here is the electricity side. Refrigeration and air conditioning consume approximately 20% of global electricity. The International Institute of Refrigeration puts the number at 17 to 20% of all electricity used worldwide. Over 1 billion people on this planet still lack reliable access to any cooling technology at all. In northern Nigeria alone, over 90% of rural villages have no electricity. So we have a world that wastes 620 million tons of food per year because of no refrigeration, while simultaneously burning 20% of all electricity on mechanical cooling that over 1 billion people cannot access. And the refrigerants used in conventional systems, hydrofluorocarbons, are greenhouse gases with a global warming potential up to 14,800 times greater than carbon dioxide. This is the problem: a food system that simultaneously wastes and overheats, and the solution has been sitting in the Egyptian desert for 4,500 years. The Zearpot, also called the pot-and-pot refrigerator, is one of the simplest functional devices ever engineered by human beings. And I mean that literally. There are 5 components: 1 large unglazed clay pot, 1 smaller glazed or unglazed clay pot that fits inside the larger one, sand poured into the gap between the 2 pots, water poured over the sand until it is thoroughly saturated, and a damp cloth placed over the top as a lid. That is the entire device. No wiring, no compressor, no refrigerant, no moving parts, no electricity, no maintenance, beyond adding water once or twice a day. Here is how it works. The science is called evaporative cooling, and it operates on the same principle as human sweat. When water evaporates, it absorbs thermal energy from its surroundings. Specifically, it absorbs what physicists call the latent heat of vaporization. The wet sand between the 2 pots wicks moisture outward through the porous wall of the outer clay pot. As that moisture reaches the outer surface and evaporates into the surrounding air, it pulls heat away from the inner pot. The temperature inside the inner pot drops. How much does it drop? Research reviews examining multiple pot-and-pot studies found that these systems lower internal temperatures by an average of 8 to 18 degrees Celsius, that is roughly 14 to 36 degrees Fahrenheit below ambient temperature. In dry, hot climates where temperatures routinely exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the interior of a Zearpot can reach the low 60s or even the mid-40s Fahrenheit. That is, within the range of a conventional household refrigerator. The key variable is humidity. Evaporative cooling works best in hot, dry environments, exactly the conditions found across the Sahel, the Middle East, Central Asia, and the arid regions of South America and India. In humid climates, the evaporation rate drops and cooling efficiency decreases. But in the regions where food loss from lack of refrigeration is most catastrophic, the Zir pot performs at its absolute best. The physics and the geography align perfectly. The principle of evaporative cooling from porous clay vessels is not new. It is ancient. There is evidence that Egyptians used this technique as early as 2500 BC during the Old Kingdom period, that is 4,500 years ago. Clay vessels filled with water were placed in open air or near windows. The evaporation through the porous walls cooled the water inside. Wall paintings from ancient Egyptian tombs depict servants fanning water jars, accelerating evaporation to cool liquids for the pharaohs. The technique spread across civilizations. In India, the matka, an unglazed clay water pot, has been used for thousands of years to keep drinking water cool in the brutal subcontinental heat. In Spain, the botejo, a traditional clay jug, operates on the identical principle and has been in use since Roman times. Across North Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia, variations of porous clay cooling vessels have appeared in every culture that faced extreme heat without access to ice. But the modern reinvention of this technology, the specific pot-and-pot configuration, with sand and a wet cloth, is credited to one extraordinary man. Mohammed Ba Abba, born in 1964 in northern Nigeria, a teacher from a family of potmakers. In the mid-1990s, Abba watched the rural communities around him lose staggering amounts of food to spoilage. Over 90% of villages in his region had no electricity. Farmers would harvest tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and spinach and watch them rot within 2 or 3 days in the Saharan heat. Abba understood the physics of evaporative cooling from indigenous African tradition. He understood clay from his family trade, and in 1995, he combined the two into a standardized, reproducible design, the pot-and-pot cooling system. He financed the first batch of 5,000 units from his own modest salary and distributed them across 5 villages. The results were immediate and measurable. Eggplant that lasted 3 days at room temperature now lasted 27 days in the Zir pot. Tomatoes went from 2 days to 21. Peppers that spoiled in 4 days lasted 3 weeks. African spinach that wilted in a single day lasted 12 days. Farmers, particularly women, could now store their produce and sell it over time rather than being forced to dump everything at market on harvest day at rock-bottom prices. Income increased, nutritional access improved. And there was an unexpected secondary effect that Abba himself noted: when families could store and sell food more profitably, they had less economic pressure to arrange early marriages for their daughters. More girls stayed in school. 2 clay pots, wet sand, a damp cloth, and the ripple effects reached gender equality and childhood education. In 2000, Abba received the Rolex Award for Enterprise, a $75,000 prize recognizing his innovation. Time magazine named the pot-and-pot one of the best inventions of 2001. He used the award money to scale production. By 2005, nearly 100,000 pot-and-pot refrigerators had been distributed across 11 Nigerian states, as well as parts of Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. The pots sold for 40 cents a pair. Mohammed Ba Abba died in 2010. He was 46 years old. His invention lives on. This is not a folk craft that happens to work sometimes. The Zir pot has been rigorously studied by serious research institutions, and the results are consistent and replicable. MIT DeLab, the design laboratory at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, has been researching clay pot coolers since 2016, conducting field trials in Mali, Rwanda, and Burkina Faso. Their published reports confirm that evaporative cooling devices provide measurable temperature reduction and meaningful shelf life extension for common fruits and vegetables in hot, dry climates. They found the cooling effect is most pronounced during midday peak heat, with temperature reductions between 7 and 10 degrees Celsius compared to ambient conditions. A comprehensive review published in E3S Web of Conferences examined multiple pot-and-pot studies and found average temperature reductions of 8 to 18 degrees Celsius, with relative humidity inside the pot increasing by 40 to 65%, a critical factor in preventing the dehydration and wilting that accelerates spoilage. Research published in the Journal of Food, Science and Technology documented that zero-energy cool chambers extended the shelf life of tomatoes from 7 days to 16 days, and eggplant from 4 days to 9 days even in tropical conditions. Separate field research reported by Cantwell found eggplant lasting 27 days instead of 3, and tomatoes lasting 21 days instead of 2 when stored in pot-and-pot systems. A study published in PMC found that the shelf life of certain fruits and vegetables maintained in evaporative cooling chambers could increase from 3 days at room temperature to up to 90 days under optimal conditions. The United Nations Environment Program has documented evaporative cooling as a sustainable alternative to conventional refrigeration in developing nations. The Sustainable Energy for All initiative estimates that 526 million tons of food production loss is directly attributable to inadequate cold chain infrastructure and identifies low-cost evaporative cooling as one of the most promising and accessible interventions available. The evidence is not ambiguous. The Zier pot works. It has been field tested across 3 continents. It has been reviewed by the top engineering university on Earth. It has been endorsed by the United Nations. The science is settled. So if this technology is 4,500 years old, costs $10 or less, requires no electricity, has been validated by MIT, endorsed by the UN, and awarded by Rolex, why is it not everywhere? The answer has nothing to do with physics and everything to do with economics. You cannot patent a clay pot. You cannot license evaporation. There is no intellectual property in sand. And there is no recurring revenue stream from a device that requires nothing but water to operate. The Zier pot is the opposite of a business model. It cannot be monetized at scale by any corporation because its components are universally available. Its construction requires no specialized skill, and its operating cost is effectively zero.